Great to be here. It's great to see a pile of people. We're all in the room together. It's good afternoon to everybody who's here joining us live, and also to those who are watching remotely. And I understand there's over 100 more bodies that I think are watching us remotely as well. I'd like to begin, I guess, first by thanking Memorial's Dr. Timmons and the CARE Initiative and the Atlantic Institute of Policy Research, excuse me, for bringing us together to discuss the economic trajectory of Newfoundland and Labrador. I was encouraged by the introductory words of the conference materials that stated, and I quote, "Compromise and a common objective, devoid of political stripes and specific interest groups, will be needed," as this is precisely what our province needs as we navigate the difficult road ahead. So I'm not here to speak from a partisan perspective, not to pass judgment on current or past leaders and governments, but merely to speak from my own experience and unique viewpoint as a former premier of our great province. I feel it is important to be reminded of how our policies actually made positive and identifiable differences in the lives of our residents, and to remind you about how we felt as a people during our time, proudly holding our heads high in this federation and giving our young people hope for a better tomorrow. I feel that some of that has been lost in the intervening years, and as we emerge from the global pandemic, I would love to see a renewal of that positive energy. Disraeli once said, quote, "The English nation is never so great as in adversity." And I think Newfoundland and Labrador is no different. I entered the Premier's office in 2003, having spent nearly 3 years as Leader of the Opposition. I've said before that during that time, I estimate I read approximately 500,000 pages of materials, commissions, reports, and best practices from around the globe. I sought counsel from some of the most experienced, diverse, and knowledgeable people that I could find. I read, I listened, and I learned. And when we formed government, we had a thoughtful, strategic, and a well-researched plan for economic, social, and cultural prosperity. You will recall a PricewaterhouseCoopers report early in our mandate confirmed our worst fears. Without substantial measures to deal with our fiscal realities, we were facing bankruptcy as a province. And while the slash and cut approach sounds simple, anyone who has ever held office knows that approach is neither politically nor economically practical. Efficiencies had to be found, but not at any cost. Nonetheless, that report did result in cancellations, deferrals, and expenditure constraint, which immediately led to a public sector strike. 3 months after our election, tens of thousands of workers were chanting angrily on the steps and lawns of the Confederation Building. And yes, as an aside, they were delivering horse manure to my parking lot in the Confederation Building. But generally, people understood. One of those very workers 2 years later said to me, quote, "I hated you then, but I understand now why you had to do it." Despite our limited resources, we began in earnest implementing our long-term plans to rebuild. And Band-Aid solutions were not the answer. We chose, indeed, to primarily focus on identifying major potential sources of new revenue. Our approach was primarily fourfold. First, going after more equitable partnerships with the federal government, including the Atlantic Accord. Second, revisiting arrangements with our oil and gas partners for more lucrative returns to our province. Third, reassessing the Grand Churchill River and hydroelectric development. The fourth and more intangible piece was cultivating a renewed sense of self and place for the people of the province within the Canadian Federation. As it turns out, it was an invaluable piece of the puzzle. But it all had to start with the big bucks. A simple pie chart revealed that our share of the Atlantic Accord revenues was approximately a meager 15%. This very basic yet powerful piece of information was enough to convince Prime Minister Paul Martin that we are in fact not the principal beneficiaries of our oil and gas revenues, as was intended by the Accord. And he agreed to revisit it. It took 7 months and the help of many allies to overcome the federal finance bureaucracy, but we succeeded. And the symbolism when we brought home that check for $2 billion was a TSN turning point for both the psyche and the coffers of our province. Now, fair warning, conference organizers have asked me to talk about why our government did what we did. So buckle up for a little trip down memory lane. I've been given about a half an hour, including what I've already used up. With the Accord money in hand, the deficit came down and we commenced implementation of our strategic plan. It started with the basics, addressing the crumbling infrastructure province-wide. We increased essential infrastructure spending annually to eventually more than $1 billion in 2010. Not only did it create massive employment, but this spending on roads, the Trans-Labrador Highway, broadband, schools, hospitals, long-term care facilities, and so on, sent a clear signal to business that they could invest in our rural communities. It gave them confidence knowing that the nuts and bolts infrastructure necessary for success would be there for them. But we didn't focus only on bricks and mortar. We implemented tax relief, including a large personal income tax reduction and eliminating it altogether for low-income earners. And we increased minimum wages, putting more income in the hands of those who needed it most. Our healthcare budget increased to $2.7 billion for badly needed services and facilities, from insulin pumps for children to the province's first PET scanner. We spent where we felt it was needed. With an investment of approximately $500 million, we developed and implemented an innovative poverty reduction strategy that was heralded by national experts as a model for Canada. There were significant increases in education funding, including here at MUN and the College of the North Atlantic, including both a new academic building and student residences in St. John's. Our K-12 budget hit over $1 billion, including capping class sizes, and we delivered the best student aid package in the country. Coupled with our youth retention and attraction program, our goals was to see our young people not just survive, but to thrive here. We invested millions in an innovation strategy, creating a $20 million commercialization fund and regional sectoral diversification fund. We revived the aquaculture industry to help communities on the Conagra Peninsula, where they were experiencing almost 100% unemployment in many communities. And we stepped up for workers when multinational companies like Abitibi just walked away. We developed a thorough immigration strategy, and our ocean strategy was designed to put that industry at the forefront of the province where it is today. And in order to stimulate information technology, we appointed a chief information officer to direct growth of that industry and more evenly distribute the business. We also launched the province's first strategic cultural plan. We were proud to be among the first investors in both the Republic of Doyle and the Fogo Island Inn. I sat with the Alan Hawkos and the Zeta Cobbs of the world and was inspired by their vision and knew these type of investments would pay massive dividends. I'm glad to see governments since continue to invest in this kind of activity as it puts our province on the map in ways that oil, gas, and hydropower never will. We also revitalized our tourism marketing. I recall at the time, our entire marketing budget for the province and that was because it was within our means, was equivalent only to that of a local brewery's marketing budget. We refocused and delivered Newfoundland and Labrador into a whole new era as a preferred tourist destination with internationally award-winning ads. We rebranded ourselves as Canada's youngest and coolest province. And we were just hitting our stride when the global recession hit in 2008, but we did not take our foot off the gas, as we knew that this would stop our momentum dead in its tracks. We continued to fuel the economy and emerged from the recession with increases in GDP, retail sales, employment investment, and even a population spurt. We continued with infrastructure funding and also supported business attraction, the fishery, farming, forestry, and mining through incentives. We provided significant funding to our Northern Strategic Plan for Labrador and negotiated the landmark New Dawn Agreement with the Innu based upon fairness and equity. Of note, this also included redress for the Upper Churchill, which we felt determined to include, knowing how unjust it is that Quebec refuses to do likewise for us as a province. While we continued to strategically invest, we also got our deficits under control and reduced our debt to $7.9 billion. And we became a half province for the first time in Confederation. It was a record I was proud to have to leave office with, and I remain very proud of it today. And of course, while all this was proceeding, we were simultaneously moving along with progress on the other two mega sources of potential revenue, oil and gas and the Churchill River. Our negotiations back then were based on three basic principles: no more giveaways, two, maximum benefits from our resources, and three, having a real and meaningful role in development of our resources through ownership. The goals we achieved will result in tens of billions of dollars to our province from oil fields alone. We told one of the biggest corporations on the planet that the Hebron oil could stay in the ground, and despite backlash from industry and mostly mainland press, but the promise of clean, easily transported North American oil and pure stubbornness on the part of our government prevailed. We ultimately signed a favorable Hebron deal with higher royalties and equity stakes, resulting in significant revenues for the people of the province, the benefits of which we are still reaping today. Tough negotiating by Nalcor officials further resulted in significantly greater benefits, royalties and equity in other projects. More than 50% royalties and 10% equity, which is merely another word for increased profit share. Of note, these very profits are precisely the assets we can use today to assist with our current economic challenges. It's no wonder that rumors abound today that mainland banks and private interests are sniffing around to snap up the oil and gas division of Nalcor. It speaks to exactly how lucrative this provincially owned asset has become. And despite the negativity perpetuated around Nalcor, that company's assets, since we created it, have gone from approximately $2.5 billion to $19 billion. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is real value. There's no doubt that climate change must be addressed. And yes, an oil-producing province like ours must play a role. But the fact remains is that oil still plays a major part in the global and local economic reality. Is it not more reasonable and responsible to extract these resources from jurisdictions such as ours, where the processes are much more safe and environmentally sound than most other places in the world? Progressive and aggressive climate change policies can and should go hand in hand with thoughtful and sensible plans to manage our way through the transition from a non-renewable to a renewable future, with the ultimate target of a green economy squarely in our crosshairs. The energy plan that we developed in 2007 started that process. It was a comprehensive long-term strategy that evolved from consultation and input from numerous shareholders. It was not just about hydro and oil and gas, but all of the valuable energy assets of the province collectively, as well as plans for energy efficiency, conservation, and climate change solution. It was a holistic approach to support responsible policy, a fact which is conveniently ignored by critics. Oscar Wilde said it best: cynics know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. The easiest thing in the world is to sit back behind a keyboard and start a blog or Twitter account and start criticizing. As noble as intentions may sometimes be, these individuals have little to no experience in what it means to actually do the work, face the tough challenges, and make those gut-wrenching decisions. I challenge them, put your name on a ballot and try making the tough calls. To govern effectively, and Premier Grimes is in the room and he would know it as well as anybody, is to strike the delicate balance between making people happy and doing the right thing. It is taking into account with every decision the needs and the wants of the people you represent, the opposition, your caucus, the media, labor unions, business interests, all the while also working within the Canadian Federation, replete with diverging interests. Now, don't misunderstand me. Elected leaders should be held accountable and decisions placed under a microscope. But relentless criticism, lacking balance or context, should not rule the day. There are some pundits who've established a career for themselves with their slot on the evening news, criticizing me and others. And don't start me on the echo chamber, that's social media. I, for one, prefer healthy, lively, nonpartisan debate with constructive and meaningful solutions, precisely like this forum, what we're doing here today. And of course, that leads me into Muskrat Falls, which has become perhaps one of the most polarizing issues in our province since the Upper Churchill. If you don't mind, I'll have a drop of water before I start on that topic. There are some pundits who've established, missed the page. Even when I was diametrically opposed to another government's policy or plan, I would not actively wish for its failure without a thought for the good of the province. With Voisey's Bay, which Premier Grimes will recall well, I criticized and was quite vocal about the deal. But I also made genuine efforts to put forward alternate ideas to help improve the agreement. And I applaud his government of the day for undertaking that project, which has been and continues to be so beneficial for our province. So there are some legitimate criticisms out there on Muskrat Falls, made easier, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, and easier again when made from the outside looking in. Over time, those who fundamentally opposed Muskrat Falls from day one have taken advantage of the narrative to completely erase from public disclosure the very real and tangible benefits of that project. One small example, of course, being the space we're in today that MUN enjoys as a result of the generosity of our partners at Emera. That came out of that project. CEO Stan Marshall unfortunately chose hyperbole in calling Muskrat Falls a boondoggle. It is a word that not only belittles our province internationally, it does a disservice to the project, and most importantly, to the thousands of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who work their butts off and continue to this day to bring this project online. The truth is, our government undertook Muskrat after years of intense review and analysis. It moved forward with the support of international experts, the federal government, consultants, and banks who were anxious to be our partners. In the intervening years, since I've departed government, a lot of water has gone under the bridge. Cost overruns, delays, protests, global oil price fluctuations. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I can give you a list a mile long of projects from around the world that doubled their budgets and then some, yet were ultimately hugely successful. Hibernia, initially labeled as a sinkhole. Valley Inco, which I've made reference to, huge success. Hydro projects in BC and Manitoba, and on and on. Our own Hebron was executed and managed by the most successful companies in the world, and went from a $6 billion budget to $14 billion without even a murmur. Excluding interest, the capital costs on Muskrat have gone from $6 billion to $10 billion today, approximately, including modifications and new capital expenditures. There has been 11 years, 5 premiers, and 2 Nalcor CEOs in the intervening years. And Mr. Stan Marshall's personal commitment when he came on as CEO was to keep the project on time and on budget. That never happened. As his final Nalcor AGM, 5 years after taking over the project, he stated that when he arrived, $8 billion had been spent with nothing to show for it. A hole in the ground is what he said. It was such an illogical and silly statement and demonstrably untrue. Yet, just after that very same meeting, he implored the government to keep the valuable expertise that exists at Nalcor for the benefit of the province. The same people who, in his own words, built a hole in the ground for $8 billion. This is the type of rhetoric that angers me and is such a disservice to the people, the province, and the project. Now, our staunchest critics still complain that my approach has always been anything but Quebec. Simply not true. Believe me, we tried. I was willing to work with anyone who would agree to a fair deal. But historically, Hydro-Quebec has not only not given us fair deals, they have taken advantage of or obstructed us every step of the way. They have not redressed the Upper Churchill. They challenge us at court in every turn. They have consistently refused us access to transmit electricity across their territory, despite North American FERC regulations, which say they must. And a lot of people don't know this, but to this very day, they continue to include our Labrador territory as their own on the maps on their official government website. Forgive me if I question their motives. But I continue to hope that one day this will change. In fact, I long for the day. As leadership changes in Quebec, there should always be hope that meaningful and fair dialogue can occur between our jurisdictions. But 50 years of history and experience has surely taught us to proceed with caution. The tone was set way back by Quebec Premier Jean Lesage in 1965, when he stated that Quebec would never allow a transmission line through its territory, and that any electricity that ever entered their territory will become the sole property of Hydro-Quebec. This sentiment has driven Quebec policy ever since. And perhaps that's why John Crosbie himself applauded Muskrat for finally showing Quebec that we could get around them. I, for one, will be watching with interest to see how things progress, including the potential development of the Atlantic Loop. We must ensure that Hydro-Quebec does not enjoy the windfall rewards of this concept, including the federal government paying for infrastructure, aiding Quebec in maintaining their stranglehold on the region. These things should be non-starters in any negotiation. This is particularly important as we inch toward that crucial date of 2041. Again, lost in the blogs and even in the inquiry is the bare minimal mention of how this project has and will continue to benefit our province. More than 5,000 hard-working Newfoundlanders and Labradorians paying taxes and contributing to the economy. This translates into literally billions of dollars of economic return, direct and indirect, in jobs and labor alone. All done building us a very valuable green asset. And as for the merits of Muskrat Falls, I'd like to quote my own words, not that I'm profound or anything, but it goes back 18 years ago to 2003. Quote, "Hydroelectricity is the preeminent renewable energy technology. Its value is growing as consumers around the globe demand products made with clean energy. If we are patient and build wisely on this core economic asset, it is sure to contribute to long-term economic prosperity for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador." These words still apply today. The only difference is that today, for the first time ever, we are positioned as a player in the marketplace with Muskrat Falls. The project delivers on one of the key goals in the 2007 Energy Plan, which was to use the financial windfalls from our non-renewable resources to build a future based on our renewable assets. In fact, very recently, our very own Federal Minister of Natural Resources and proud Newfoundland and Labrador son, Seamus O'Regan, stated on the Evening News, quote, "To be honest with you, one of the upsides of Muskrat Falls is it is going to give us a good source of power for many years to come. So puts us in a better position for greenhouse gas emissions," end of quote. And in less than 20 years, which believe me folks will be here and gone in the blink of an eye, we will have control of the Upper Churchill. I cannot state this loudly enough. We have waited 50 years. We are finally in the driver's seat. We cannot let this opportunity slip through our fingers. Let's not give away a deal in 2041. I'm sorry, let me put that clearer. Let's not give away 2041 for a deal in 2021. Instead of getting the Muskrat off our backs, let's just keep focused on getting the Upper Churchill back. I would like again to express my appreciation for this opportunity to put into context our time in office. Was our government perfect? No. Would we change anything we did? Probably not. In 2010, my last year, Mark Carney, then Governor of the Bank of Canada, said that Newfoundland and Labrador was, quote, "an economic model for the rest of the country." Clearly, we were doing something right. It was a powerful statement from a very powerful individual. And we do have the tools to get back there again. I'm not naive enough to believe that partisanship will cease to exist. And sometimes conflict is necessary. Trust me, I never thought I would debate my childhood hero, Paul McCartney, on international TV or take down the Canadian flag But some battles are worth fighting for. There's also a time, though, for cooperation and compromise. I believe in this great province as strongly today as I did when I entered office in 2003. It's the reason that since I left politics, I've continued to invest my life's earnings back into the economy right here at home. And great things are happening out there. Look at Verafin and MISA. Look no further than local entrepreneur Carl Diamond, who announced last week in Stephenville his own $200 million private investment into a community that many had written off, except the people of Stephenville. That signals a brand new beginning for the West Coast. Great stuff. Young, ambitious Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are out there identifying opportunities and willing to do what it takes to create success here because they love this place. So my advice is simple. We must identify our strengths and develop long-term strategies to capitalize on them. Welcome new ideas, embrace them, and support those who are willing to take the risks. Build the broadest base possible in terms of building the economy. Oil, fish, minerals, these are all critically important, including maintaining control of the Churchill River. But a truly successful Newfoundland and Labrador will also involve adventure tourism, microbreweries, airspace industries, film and TV production, and so much more. Our potential as a people has never been an obstacle, and the foundation for success has already been laid in our province. Barack Obama once said, quote, "We did not come to fear the future. We came to shape it." So let's all commit to putting fear and rhetoric and politics aside and concentrating on shaping that brilliant future we know is within our reach. Thank you very much for your attention. I know it's been a long day so far, so thanks for putting up with me. No time for any questions, I guess, Linda?
No, we'll get a few in. We'll squeeze them in there. Okay, we have one here on the floor.
Yes,
Okay, and if you just remind her and introduce yourself, please.
will do. Hi, Mr. Williams, long time no see. I'm Tim Woodford, and I represent a company called Financial One. I'm not going to ask you a question, Mr. Williams, sorry. I just want to make a statement. I want to put it out here today because I got everybody in the room today, and I want to thank Dr. Locke for letting me come today. And I just want to make a statement, Dr. Gammon. It's nothing political or anything like that. I just wanted the people of this great province, and you just said it, I'm a patriot Newfoundlander. I'm a patriot Canadian, and I am very concerned about what I see going on and the divisiveness and, as you said, the bipartisanship that isn't happening in our provinces, in our country. I want to say to you, and I want everybody to hear it, it's not just you, Mr. Williams, and Dr. Locke is aware of it. I spoke to Dr. Locke about it, that the company that we represent is offering to put up $1.65 billion for the offshore and get both the projects going and take all the risk, so the province is not on the hook, and nor is the federal government. The second phase of it was also to refinance, as you just spoke about, Muskrat Falls, Churchill Falls, the hospitals, the universities, anything that we can, because I want to make sure that we protect the assets of the province, and I want to make sure they're not sold off. Because once we sell those assets, regardless if we get top dollar for them, I don't think we'll ever get them back. And our province is at a real crossroads. The last thing I want to reiterate today is that the third phase of what we've offered to the province is also to refinance that gross net debt that we have been battling around. It's, as per the PERT team, is $26.1 billion. Just with refinancing it under our company's plan would save the province $1.45 billion a year because it's at 1% for the next 6 years, interest only. So it's a big save to the province. Over the next 6 years, it's $8.7 billion. Dr. Parfrey's here in the room somewhere, I think. With his team, with Sister Elizabeth, he's talking about 30% in the healthcare side. So that's another $900 million. So we could be looking at a $2.5 billion save to the province over the next 6 years, per year now I'm talking. So I just wanted you and everybody in this room to know that that's what we're attempting to do. I've been getting politically blocked. I've been working with the government on and off. I've been into NALCOR. I've talked to the PERT team through one of the PERT members. I've spoken to NALCOR. I've been into NALCOR 7 times. I've spoken to their executive team. I've done everything I could to try and put this plan forward. And just to give you an idea, I sat with Terry Roberts today, and that was intentional. Sorry, Terry, I didn't mean to bomb you, but anyways. We loan to banks, this private lender is. So that'll give you gravity how big they are. And they're willing to do it for the federal government as well. And I know we're talking about the carbon initiatives, but we're not just willing to do that. We've offered the feds to do all of their green initiatives, any of the infrastructure, anything like that across this country. So it's a very aggressive plan. So I just wanted everybody to know that that's what we had put forward, and I wanted everybody just to hear it.
Okay.
Because I figured out it was time.
Thank you
for your time.
Well, we'll get quickly to a question, please.
Thank you, Tim.
Over here on the floor. If you could
Yes.
introduce yourself, please. Yes.
You're asking me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good to see you, Mr. Williams.
Don.
Don Downer, retired professor, Grenfell College. I had the pleasure yesterday of listening to Walter Schroeder on VOCM Open Line, and he made some very interesting comments. Walter, by the way, is certainly no lacking in credentials. He's the originator for DBRS and also now a contributor to a lot of different projects around Canada. He made a statement that I found quite interesting because what he was talking about was the fact that there's a situation right now in Canada whereby there's a situation with respect to I guess it's a case of trying to determine if the transfer payments that ceased some years ago would be renewed. His recommendation, and this is what I'd like to have your comment on, that the transfer payments that were not renewed in 2018, he's saying that whenever we can qualify, which I think is 2023, there should be a reinstatement, a full reinstatement. He says that we're due $1.2 billion. He's recommending that that continue up to 2041. I'd like to hear your comment on that recommendation from him.
Don, I didn't hear him myself, and I appreciate him for enlightening me in the room and what he had to say. Let me tell you, when we tackled the federal government, and any federal government, on the whole equalization formula, it's very, very complex. It works against Newfoundland and Labrador because of the way we're structured, because of the way our economy is. It works for Quebec. We get zero, Quebec gets $13+ billion a year. Part of the benefit that we had over the years through the Atlantic Accord was the offset credits that came in. So we got the benefit of offset credits, so they offset what we were losing by having the revenues come in. The whole formula, the whole transfer arrangement needs to be totally revisited. There's no doubt about it. But it needs to be done without the big province politics in it. As long as there's going to be catering to Quebec in a revision of that formula, then we won't get fairness and equity because we've got 7 seats. That's the raw politics of it, and that's not a reflection on a Liberal government or a PC government or an NDP government. So anything constructive with regard to revising that formula is helpful. I mean, we actually had, and one of the problems I had with Prime Minister Harper at the day was we actually had a commitment from him to take out the non-renewable resources out of the formula so that we would have gotten more as a province. It would have worked out to about $10 billion for us. He committed to that, and then he broke that. See, once you get into that federal finance bureaucracy, that's when things start to shut down and the formulas start to work against us. So I don't know all the intricate details of that yesterday, but we do need creative thinking as to how we get a fair deal from Canada.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Don.
We'll get another question over here.
In your speech, Mr. Williams, you inferred that those who oppose Muskrat Falls and some of your decision-making hide behind blogs and Twitter accounts and don't have the gall to step up to run for office. It is very difficult to speak truth to power. So I am not going to hide behind my tweet today. And of course, as you may know, I am now currently in my third run for office. So I will stand here and I will say that I found it distasteful how you treated proponents who oppose and are calling out the grave, and I found it very disappointing in your speech. You did not at all acknowledge the impacts of the debt to this province directly because of decisions that you led regarding Muskrat Falls are impacting every man, woman, and child right now. I found it distasteful, and I wanted to come to the microphone to tell you to your face so I won't be accused of hiding behind a tweet. Thank you.
Well, I must say I sincerely apologize to you if you if you found it distasteful. That certainly wasn't my intention. I think part of the frustration that I experienced, and I did indicate that running for office is difficult. And I looked down there before for Premier Grimes, but I now see him right straight in front of me. Is that it's a difficult mix. It's a difficult balance. In order to make decisions, you've got to weigh the pros and cons. You do it with the best interests of the province at heart. You do it with the best information that's available to you at the time. So when I sit down and I give my evidence at an inquiry, and when I'm about to espouse the benefits of Muskrat Falls, I get cut off by the commissioner, who basically says, I don't want to hear that. Well, part of my decision, part of the reason we embarked on Muskrat Falls in the beginning, because we looked at the pros and the cons. We had exhausted every possible avenue with Quebec to do Gull Island and to develop the mid-Churchill is what I call it. So then we reverted back to we reverted over to a Muskrat Falls scenario, and then looked at ways to make that work because we didn't have any alternative. We had the dirty emissions producing Holyrood and Seal Cove. We got the best advice at the time that was available. Now that was in 2010, that was gate 2 of the process. Subsequently, through the next 2 years, there was even more. The federal government were on board, the banks were on board, international experts were on board, experts in Manitoba were on board. So all the best information was put together to make the best possible decision by the people who were involved. So that was me at one point, and then beyond that, that were other people who moved into my position. If you think for 1 minute that it was my intention to saddle our province with burdensome debt, that is my point on critics. Critics just talk about the numbers, but they don't look at the value. As a leader, and I hope you get elected someday, you will find that you need to have a big picture vision. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, and we can get one more question in, and we've got some time at the end of the day, so hopefully that's okay. Briefly, and please introduce yourself. Yep.
My name is Barry Derby. Quick question. Government is about the enactment of laws and their administration. So a triple question to you. What new laws do you think we should enact? What existing laws should we amend? And what laws should we repeal to further our future as you see it?
I admire and appreciate your question. And I'm a lawyer. I don't know where to start. I mean, I wouldn't know where to start. And my biggest thing about coming here today is I want to make sure that I wasn't here, passing judgment on past governments. Like, as a government, if we inherited a situation, that wasn't because of a government that came immediately before us. That was a culmination of problems that arose in the province and accumulated. So then we take it as we find it. Premier Fury takes it as he finds it, and he deals with it. There is no magic solution of being able to go into the legislature and putting things in black and white that can solve all of our problems. I wish there was. If you got something in mind, make sure you contact me after and let me know. But you know, the legislature and the legislation of this province is very, very complex, and it evolves. And through debate in the House of Assembly, it gets amended all the time, and people try to improve it. So, you know, in fairness to Premier Fiore as well, you know, they're out there doing the best they can. They've inherited some difficult circumstances, and I appreciate that. They're well motivated. Having been told slightly about what Minister Cody heard this morning, I didn't hear her address, but they're, you know, adopting a lot of the same strategies and policies that we're doing, and so they're doing their very best. And I honestly feel that all governments that we have here in this province, we're blessed. They do their very best. I've made a point of saying that in the course of my political career, I never criticized Premier Smallwood. You know, sure, people go back and say, well, you're going to blame Joey for the upper church. Well, I'm sorry, Premier Smallwood, again, had to deal with the cards, or had to handle the cards that were dealt to him. And he ran up against a federal government and Quebec. And that's why he got cornered into the Upper Churchill deal. It wasn't Joe Smallwood's fault. You drive around these roads and look at all of what Joe Smallwood did here in this province over the years. So, again, coming back in a roundabout way to your question, it's a very difficult, complex process. And you know, if there are any specific pieces of legislation, you know, that you could recommend or that we could look at, you know, perhaps basically some legal or scholarly expertise in this province would help us shape what some of the law reform could be. And of course, we get that from Dalhousie Law School and Fredericton Law School and other esteemed law schools around the country. So that pool of academic legal research is something we should really look at.
Thank you. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Williams.
Thank you.
And we will move swiftly along.